From the Journalism and Media Academy Magnet School in Hartford, it's Profession Sessions, conversations with media professionals for students who want to follow in their footsteps.
Hi, I'm Savannah Anderson, and you're listening to Profession Sessions. Our guest today is Diane Smith, an Emmy Award-winning TV journalist, documentary producer, radio talk show host, New York Times best-selling author and speaker. Diane Smith has been on the air in Connecticut since 1982. Ms. Smith won an Emmy while being a news reporter and an anchor on WTNH-TV in New Haven. She co-hosted the morning show on WTIC News Talk 1080 for several years, which my mom loves, by the way, and has published 6 books based on her Positively Connecticut TV series on CPTV. Ms. Smith now works for Connecticut Network, the state government channel. Welcome to the show, Ms. Smith.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a thrill to be here. What a cool school.
Thank you. Now let's just jump right into our first question. When did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in journalism?
Well, I think actually my first experience was when I was 10 years old, and I went to Girl Scout camp, and they were handing out chores, and I didn't like the sound of most of the chores, like cleaning the latrines or cleaning up after everybody had dinner, and they wanted someone who would volunteer to read and report the camp news and read it every morning in the big dining hall where we all gathered. And I said, that sounds like a job for me. So I guess it goes all the way back to then.
What was your first job in TV?
I started in radio, but my first job in television was in Binghamton, New York, which is where I had gone to college. Yeah. And it was at a CBS station in upstate New York. And it was a very small station, so everybody kind of had to do a lot of everything, which is really good training, as you learn a lot. And that's where I started.
Yep, so you had your hand in everything down there.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I think even when I became an anchor, one day I was anchoring the weekend news, and one of those days I actually had to write and report sports. And believe me, if it's not Yankee baseball, I barely know anything about sports.
Don't know much about all that other stuff there.
Nope.
All right. Do you remember your first big story?
Yeah, I do. My first big story, really big story, actually happened on my first job when I was in Binghamton, New York. And what happened was there was a very big office building where the state workers worked right in downtown Binghamton. It was the biggest building, tallest building in town, and several hundred people worked there. And one morning, a transformer in the basement, which was the parking garage, exploded, and PCBs came out of it. And they spread throughout the entire building through the air conditioning ducts. And at the time, people didn't really know how bad PCBs were and how they could cause cancer and birth defects and all that. But we quickly found that out. They evacuated the building, and but I didn't know how dangerous it was, so I went into the building without a breathing mask or anything else. But it turned out to be a very big story. It was reported all over the country because it was really one of the first times that health experts realized just how dangerous it was. I covered that story every single day for an entire year until I left the station to come to Connecticut, and always found a new story to do every single day. And what eventually happened is that they tried to clean the building to bring the people back in, but they never could get the level of PCBs in the air low enough to be safe for human habitation. So it is now a Superfund site, and it's going to be torn down. And that is like 30 years ago. Wow. So that was my first biggie. Yeah.
And it's still
there and still abandoned, unoccupied. Yeah.
Wow. How has the world of broadcasting changed since you started?
Tremendously. Technology has changed so dramatically that it's really kind of mind-boggling. And actually, the last few years, the technology has really accelerated. So even though I started in my TV career when they were still shooting film before videotape was around, picture that, the last few years have brought even more changes in technology because technology itself is going faster and faster and faster. So it's changed tremendously, and I would say largely because of technology.
What advice can you give to some students who are interested in pursuing a career in television or radio?
I think the advice that I would give them is try to get experience wherever you can. Get your foot in the door wherever you can. If you're going to a terrific school like this with state-of-the-art equipment, produce programs, produce content, and get it out there, either on the radio station, upload it to YouTube, put it out in Twitter. Any way you can get it out there and get as much experience as you can. Get an internship. You guys here are really lucky because you're going to get at some point a chance to work over at the Connecticut Public Television Station and work side by side with professional people in radio and TV. A lot of people have to go for an internship just to get that possibility of that happening. So I think the more experience that you can get early on in your career, the better off you're going to be. And the other advice I would say is don't do it unless you love it. You know, you have to follow your passion and your dream.
Yeah, so students like me who go to a school like this with this state-of-the-art equipment should really take advantage of the opportunity that they have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you might discover while you're here that this is your passion, and you might discover that it's not. And either way, that's fine.
Find a love.
Yep.
Could you talk about the importance of preparation before an interview?
To me, it's really important. It's very interesting because different people have different attitudes. I used to work with an anchor who used to say, if I'm going to interview an author, the people in the audience haven't read the book, so why should I read the book? I should just ask the questions that they would ask because they don't know anything about it. I don't believe in that. My experience tells me that you're much better off doing as much research as you can because it gives you insight into the topic as well as into the people that are part of that. And as a journalist, you are thrown into different topics every single day. You never really know what you might cover, and that's part of what makes it such a fabulous job. But for instance, when I do a town hall meeting, I just did 2 live programs at CPTV over the last 2 weeks, and they're town hall meetings, which means you have a live audience in the studio, and people who are watching it on television or watching the live stream can call in, can tweet, can email, and so you're interacting with people. You have one topic, and you're interacting with all those people in the studio, out of the studio, and you have a panel of experts. And before I did those shows, it's a live 1-hour show. They ran on Tuesdays, and I started doing research a couple of weeks before. And for the entire weekend before the show, I just did research. I read and read and read. I took notes until I knew the subject inside and out and had all kinds of things that were going to be at the top of my head so that I could speak, extemporaneously without having a script or anything in front of me. So I do a lot of preparation.
You just answered my next question.
Okay.
Everybody thinks that working in broadcasting is glamorous. I mean, what are some of the realities?
Well, obviously, it's a lot more glamorous than a lot of other jobs. It's a heck of a lot more glamorous than working in a coal mine or, lots of other jobs that you could think of. So there is some glamour to it. But the reality is that you can work very long hours. You work all different times of the day and the night. So broadcasting doesn't end. It's, 24/7. Journalism is 24/7, no matter what platform you're on. And so, there are some times when you're working really long hours, when you're missing holidays or you're missing your kids' ball game or you're missing a concert or whatever. So those are some of the realities. And sometimes the work is really difficult. It can be painful sometimes when you get really close to people and bad things happen to them. That can be bad. It can be bad when you go to ask somebody how they feel about something and their girlfriend hits you in the head with the pocketbook, which happened to me. I was trying to get an interview with a serial killer, and his girlfriend hit me in the head with a pocketbook, right on camera. So there are bad things that can happen, but I think overall it still has a lot of appeal, and there is a certain amount of glamour to it, sure.
If you could go back in time to when you were starting your career, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to be more confident, to really feel that I could do anything that was coming in my direction and do it well as long as I had an opportunity to think about it and prepare. And I think I would tell myself to really shoot for the stars and not be afraid of rejection and to just go for it. Be fearless.
All right. Who are some of the most interesting people you've interviewed?
Oh, my goodness. I have interviewed at least 3 presidents. I interviewed the first George Bush president. I interviewed President Clinton. I interviewed Barack Obama before he was elected. I've interviewed Hillary Clinton. So those are some of my tops in terms of politics. I've interviewed all the governors of the state of Connecticut since I got here 20-something years ago, 28 years ago, I guess. And so in politics, those are some of the most interesting people that I've interviewed. I've interviewed all of the U.S. senators that Connecticut has had. In the entertainment field, I think some of my favorite interviews were with people like Bob Marley. I did an interview with him right after he was diagnosed with cancer and did an interview about that. I've interviewed all kinds of movie stars and television stars and, everybody from Tom Hanks to Michael Jackson was a really good interview, too. Very interesting interview. Very interesting. So I have interviewed some very interesting people, and they're really exciting stuff.
That's interesting, all those big names.
And, that's where the glamour comes in. That's the glamorous part. And, the part that people don't see is that if you're going to go interview the president, you have to be checked out by the Secret Service, and you have to submit all kinds of documents. And then, for instance, if you and I were going to go cover President Obama today at the Coast Guard Academy, you'd have to get there, practically right after the sun rises, and then you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then eventually you get a chance. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. That's not the glamorous part, but let's face it, having a chance to interview the president is pretty cool.
A lot of people can say that.
It's pretty cool.
Out of all the different jobs that you've done throughout your whole career, do you have a favorite?
I do. I have loved each job while I was doing it, and sometimes have thought it was the only job that I would ever want to do. When I was a news anchor at Channel 8, I just thought I'd be a news anchor forever. I just couldn't imagine doing anything else. And then I realized it was time to find other ways to branch out.
Stepping grounds.
Exactly. And I've had so much fun since then. I wouldn't trade any of the jobs I've had. They've all been great. But my favorite one really was hosting the morning show on WTIC News Talk 1080.
Yes.
I loved that.
I like that one, too.
I really loved it. I mean, it was great. It was really great. I had a terrific partner. He's still there. He's still on the air, Ray Dunaway. And the thing that was so really, really cool was that so many people that are newsmakers listen to that station. So when I was in television, if I wanted to do an interview with, say, some key legislators talking about a particular issue that was coming up in the state capitol, I'd have to make calls, and I'd have to hope that they would take my call, and I'd have to hope that, they'd make time for me, and I'd have to schlep to their office and all that stuff. Well, what happened at WTIC is because all those people are listening to the radio, they call you on their cell phone. So you're sitting there on the air, and all of a sudden you have a U.S. Senator on the other end of the line saying, well, Diane, what I think is. So that was an excellent job. Plus, you didn't have to go out in the cold or the snow
that was a personal
or the rain.
favorite.
That was a definite perk. And the other thing was, the first few days when I showed up, I was dressed like an anchor woman. I had a suit on, I had pantyhose on, I had high heels on. And they said to me, wait a minute, you got this is radio. You can show up in your pajamas if you want.
Can see you.
And that was kind of cool. I never went in my pajamas, but I definitely went in sometimes without makeup on and without doing my hair. And that was nice.
Out. They're just hearing your voice.
Exactly.
So I like radio.
Exactly.
Have to dress up.
It's a good thing.
How did you get jobs? Did you go to auditions, submit demo tapes, things like that?
Yeah, a little bit of all of that. In my first couple of TV jobs, I submitted demo tapes. I heard about an opening at the station, and I submitted a tape. I got rejected a lot from a lot of stations because there's a lot of people that want to be in broadcasting. And literally, when a job opens up in any TV station in any place in the country, the news director gets hundreds and hundreds of applications, resumes, tapes. Now you don't really send tapes. Now you send a link to where your work is. So I did that. I sent out demo tapes. Now in the business we call them sizzle reels, which has all your best work on it, but just little bits and pieces of it that make you look like you're sizzling. Exactly. So I did that, and actually, the way I got the job at Channel 8 was it actually ended up being an audition because I had sent tapes, and I kept calling and calling and calling and calling, and the news director finally took my call, and he said, I can't find your tape, so why don't you just come here and let's see what happens. So I drove myself from Binghamton to New Haven. And what they did was they sent me out with one of the photographers, a very experienced, excellent photographer. Yes. And they gave me a little tiny thing from a newspaper that said a public hearing will be held tonight regarding closing such and such avenue in Hamden. And they said, go out and make a story out of that. And I had to think about it. And I had to think about how do you put people into that story, because the way you tell the best stories is getting people who are affected involved in the story, right? So I went out with this fabulous photographer who's still one of my best friends, and we shot a story. And because he was with me and he could vouch for the fact that every fact was correct and that everything that we did was appropriate, they decided to hire me. And actually that night my story got on the air and I hadn't even been hired yet. So that was pretty cool.
You made your mark.
I did.
Yes. I think that when you're in a business like this or have a career such as this one, it's filled with a lot of disappointment and rejections and things of that nature. But you have to figure out how to overcome all the no's, and then you find that one yes that can change your life forever.
You bet. And you have to develop something of a thick skin so that if people make comments, I mean, you know, when I'm on TV, everybody in the world who sees you feels they have a right to comment on you, and they do. When I had my first TV job, I had a consultant who came in to comment on our style and give us some coaching and stuff. And she told me that I should have my teeth filed down because they were too big. And I said to her, if I file my teeth down and I get little itty-bitty teeth and God forbid I have an accident and I break off part of it, what am I going to do? I'm not changing my teeth. I'm not, you know. So, yeah, you have to get used to the fact that people feel that everything is appropriate. One of my good friends is Gail King, who's Oprah's best friend. And Gail told a story for a book that I wrote about how when she was early on in her career at Channel 3, her news director came and said to her, Gail, please make sure that you pull the chair all the way in under the desk. And she said, why is that? And he said, because your butt's too wide and we're seeing it on camera. And she said, and I pulled my chair all the way in. She said, but if I had the confidence then that I have now, I would have said, what are you talking about? That is my butt, and it's staying on that chair. So, yeah, you have to develop your own self-confidence and know that what you're doing is worth doing and be able to take no and to eventually find yes. Yeah,
and it also applies to your life. You can't let people or things that people say change who you are.
Absolutely.
You know, you're unique in your own way, and you do things the way that you do them. You can't let people come in and say, no, you got to change this. Your nose is too long. You got to make it a little shorter. You know.
And, you know, you're absolutely right on that. And I think that the people who do the best on the air, whether it's television or radio, are the people who are their real selves on the air. And I'll tell you what, that is the hardest thing to do for most people, especially on TV, when you can get very self-conscious about cameras and how you look and all of that. And when you're anchoring the news, how your voice sounds. And it's very hard to just be yourself. But when you're able to just be yourself, that's when people in the audience connect with you.
Yes. Thank you.
You bet.
Miss Smith.
Well, thank you very much.
For joining us.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
I think you could have a very bright career in radio.
Thank you.
I like the way you were on the air.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. Really, it was great.
All right. I'm Savannah Anderson, and this has been another Profession Sessions. Stay tuned for more.
Profession Sessions is created and produced by Claire Faulkner with assistance from Amelia Bice and Steve Hodges. Our music is The Jazz Piano by bensound.com. This is a production of the Journalism and Media Academy Magnet School in Hartford, Connecticut.